So imagine with me a time machine and a chance to take a special trip back in Easter history. As a Unitarian Universalist who ministers to all paths, I've wrestled with how to understand the Easter story more authentically. So I thought it would be interesting to travel back in time to see what it might have been like to meet Jesus. Are you game?
Yes.
Okay, so you open the door to the time capsule, you step inside, you strap on your seatbelts and set the dial for the year AD 30. Instruments whir, the capsule vibrates briefly, and suddenly you're in Jerusalem during the Roman Empire. Your screen tells you that the Roman government, with King Herod in power, is completely corrupt. Many of the Pharisees, the moneylenders, and the government officials have become immoral, unethical, and bigoted. The common folk are suffering. You immediately check the dial to confirm that you've actually traveled in time. But the sandals are sandals and not Birkenstocks, so you are convinced that you're there. You leave the time capsule in a cave and walk to town. You hear about a good man, a guy who's standing up against the corruption and lies. He's advocating for the sick and the poor, for the children, for the animals and the downtrodden. Inspiring when he speaks, he rallies young and old to live lives of greater kindness and love. He's also rumored to heal people and even perform miracles. Really? Skeptical, you go to see him when someone tells you he's washing ordinary people's feet at a nearby river. You see this man and you stop. Something tells you he's the real deal. There's an aura of love and light around him. He seems to embody integrity, peace, and compassion. He's gentle and kind, but he rails against injustice. And he exemplifies many of the qualities that you would like to embody. His name, as you well know, is Jesus. He's from a small town called Nazareth, but these days he seems itinerant. You notice his entourage of 12 guys who are his closest confidants, his disciples. They look out for him and protect him. And you too are entranced by him, and he soon becomes a role model for you, a teacher for your higher aspirations. So you follow him. Now, there's no social media or recording technology at the time, so you actually have to follow him physically, from place to learn from him. It's a lot of walking, but you've been doing a lot of sitting lately, and you're motivated to get your steps in. And you're also inspired to walk because he seems to walk the talk. He practices what he preaches. And it's a wisdom that you've been longing for all your life. When you're around him, you feel seen and heard. You feel loved, and you become a better version of yourself. And life seems more manageable and understandable in his presence. After you've followed and learned from the Nazarene for a few months, the Roman government targets him for insurrection. King Herod feels trumped. People are calling Jesus the King of the Jews, but Herod is the King of the Jews, and some even say Jesus is the Son of God. And following him, after just a short time, you learn that Jesus is suddenly betrayed and even denied by his own scared disciples. you don't understand why. Soon after, he's taken into custody by the governor Pontius Pilate to be crucified among common criminals. He's mocked as the king of the Jews, given a crown of thorns as a cruel joke, and derided for supposedly being the Son of God. You watch in horror and disbelief as he dies a pitiful, painful death on the cross. Now, even though you already knew the ending of this tale, there's still a rush of outrage and despair. Why does this amazing man have to die so cruelly? It reminds you of the senseless assassinations of great people in our day, like Martin Luther King Jr. or John F. Kennedy. Your sense of injustice is awakened and angry. This good man you'd looked up to and adored is executed like a common criminal. So together with thousands of others, you mourn the death of this great civil rights leader and healer, this man who inspired you to be a better version of yourself. After his death, you're filled with doubt and wonder, was it all a dream? And then a few days later, you hear the famous whispers that he's back. He's back from the dead. He's walking about, appearing to various people. He's showing the nail holes in his hands and saying that even death cannot conquer us. There is hope of life beyond death. Hearing of his resurrection, you begin to rediscover your own sense of hope. If this carpenter can defy death, perhaps death is not the terrible ending we're all fearing. Perhaps there is more. You ponder this as you walk through the hot sands back to the cave where you hid the time machine. You climb in, you set the dials for April 1st, 2018, and return to the here and now to tell people what you've experienced, and it's no April Fool's joke. So how do you feel? Were you able to suspend disbelief just for a little bit and experience what it might have been like to actually meet Jesus? Did you get a sense of the power of this truly good North African man countering all the lies, the corruption and immorality? This story gives me hope because of who Jesus was. Imagine such a leader today who could stand up with strength and wisdom to the establishment, a person who embodied integrity, love, truth, and compassion. Imagine how refreshing and inspiring it would be to find and follow such a leader, especially during this divided, materialistic, deconstructionist time. For me, believing that we can resurrect our best selves each day, each brand new day, is the crux of the Easter story. The hope of resurrection is that even in our darkest times, when all seems lost, goodness and light can reemerge and bring us another chance, a new day, a new beginning. Nature teaches us that everything happens in cycles and that we have an abundance of new beginnings. Each night, the sun goes down. And sometimes the night can seem endless, especially when you're wrestling with the dark night of the soul. Thoughts become darker, pain more intense, and the mind suffers more keenly in the night. And yet eventually, my friends, the sun rises. With the light of day to illuminate the morning, there is hope anew. There's another chance to begin again. So many things die and are reborn in nature. The devastating Thomas fire left the hillsides charred and black with no sign of life. And yet across the mountains today, just a few months later, you see abundant shoots of green. We just drove to Las Vegas and back for a family celebration. And on our way through the desert, we saw usually barren, parched lands covered by a soft blanket of teal green where recent rains had nourished the parched soil. From death and desolation, there is rebirth constantly. Now, many of us undergo seemingly insurmountable struggles. Long, dark nights which may feel endless. The breakdown of a relationship, the loss of a job, a protracted illness, financial ruin, the heartbreaking loss of a beloved. And these trials can devastate us. At its core, we know life involves loss. But even with that knowledge, it's still hard to live through the loss. So it may help to imagine that all the while, during the dark night of the soul, during the most painful time, something new is germinating. Something new is waiting to be born, to rise from the ashes. And our job is simply to hang in there, to persevere through the tough times. For on the other side, eventually, there will be something new, something different. On the other side lies something that will inevitably transform us. The writer and comedian Gary Shandling has an incredible story of resurrection. In 1960, when Gary was only 10, his brother died from cystic fibrosis. He wasn't allowed to say goodbye to him or go to his funeral or in any way talk or even hear about his beloved older brother, Barry. His parents wanted to deny that this was happening, to shield Gary from the pain. Gary later wrote, "I had no one that I recall putting a hand on my shoulder saying, 'This is death. This is sadness. This is grief. Stay with the pain and let's walk through it.' Stay with the pain and let's walk through it together." Isn't that what making it through the dark night of the soul is all about? Later, at the age of 25, when he was just beginning to get work in TV as a sitcom writer, torn between writing for others or becoming a comedian, Gary was getting out of his car in LA when he was hit by another car. He was badly injured and nearly killed. When he was in hospital undergoing surgery, he had an experience of leaving his body and floating above it. He heard a voice say to him, "Don't you remember when we put you in this body and we told you that you'd eventually have to leave it? Well, do you want to keep living Gary Shandling's life or do you not?" And Gary said, "I do." And then he woke up in the hospital. The accident gave me some actual insight into life and its impermanence, and that there is something else to it than what meets the eye, he said. That was my actual experience. And so I realized I best tried to figure out who I authentically was, and I could best do that through stand-up comedy. The accident changed everything for Gary. He started writing a journal and recording his thoughts on how he could live a more authentic life, the real life of Gary Emmanuel Shandling. He began meditating and journaling intensively. And these experiences gave him an in-depth knowing that we only have our bodies for a short time. This was his second chance. He decided to go for everything he wanted in life. For years, he'd felt not good enough and didn't have the confidence to pursue his heart's desire to be a stand-up comedian. After the accident, he wrote in his journal, "Do it. You are ready. Be a comedian. Each day I will gain strength. Each day I will become more determined. I will be happy doing stand-up because it is the real me. I will not look back. The secret is to be myself," he wrote. So he committed to risking stand-up. He worked hard to learn his craft every day. He felt that without meditating constantly, the flame within could easily go out, so he persisted. "Work is an expression of life," he wrote. "Do your comedy not for the sake of fame and fortune, but because it is what God does through you. You are merely a vehicle." And then one day, Gary got the call, the golden rung up. He appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and he nailed it. And the rest is history. He proceeded to have an extremely successful career in comedy and television. And Gary was considered a comedian's comedian and was highly revered throughout the business, getting 46 award nominations and 17 well-deserved wins. He later went on to create, write, and star in The Gary Shandling Show, a cutting-edge, highly reviewed TV sitcom, as well as The Larry Sanders Show, a groundbreaking spoof about what goes on behind the scenes in late-night talk shows. His life was changed by his opportunity to resurrect. Perhaps his middle name, Emmanuel, helped. Likewise, the author and speaker Anita Moorjani had a near-death experience in which she received a similar message. Some of you may remember me mentioning her in a previous sermon. In a coma, her body was riddled with cancerous tumors the size of lemons. Her organs were shutting down, and doctors gave her only a few hours to live. During that time, she too had an out-of-body experience in which she looked down at herself physically dying and heard a voice asking her whether she wanted to go on living, basking in a sense of unconditional love that was really hard to let go of. She decided she did want to come back, but only if her body was cured of cancer, so that she could start anew. In that moment, she realized that the only purpose of life was to be ourselves, to live our truths, and to be the love that we are. To be ourselves, live our truths, and to be the love that we are. As soon as she made her decision to come back, she started waking up, and her organs began working again, and her tumors started shrinking. And to the doctor's complete disbelief, within 5 weeks, she was completely cancer-free. She now lectures around the world on self-love and living authentically, and her key messages are, we are far more powerful than we've ever been led to believe. Love transcends fear. Heaven is here on earth right now, and illness is more than just a physical phenomenon. Her resurrection has led to living a life of service that touches and gives hope to millions. My friends, each day we are given, to quote the Van Morrison song that Michael and the choir sang earlier, each day we are given a brand new day. And every brand new day we get to choose who we want to be and how we want to live life. Every day we can choose to make decisions from love rather than from fear. Who would you be if you were authentically yourself? Who would you be if you lived the life that only you can live? Who would you be if you lived a life not driven by fear? A life not driven by lack or by duty or by not feeling good enough? Who would you be if you lived a life led by love and delight, a life filled with a sense of purpose and meaning? What does your authentic self crave? What makes you feel alive inside? What brings you joy and energy? What is your unique contribution? Your unique contribution to this world. That's what Gary and Anita and even Jesus are inviting us to consider this Easter. They're modeling for us that we each get an opportunity at rebirth daily without having to die or even nearly die. The sun rises again each day, one day at a time. And every time the sun rises, we have the chance to be more authentically ourselves, to start anew and leave the long, dark night behind us. Who will you be now that the sun has risen and presented you this new day? A new day to be the you that no one else but you can be. Or as Mary Oliver asks, tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? My friends, may we be ourselves, live our truths, and fully be the love that we are. Amen.